listener production.
Welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into the Australian greyhound racing industry, which last week learnt that the sport would be phased out in Tasmania by 2029, and with calls for other states to follow suit since. Andrew Jenkins is the CEO of TasRacing, the governing body for greyhound racing in Tasmania, who says the racing authority, nor those impacted by the decision, were actually consulted before it took place. Andrew, thanks very much for joining me on the briefing today. How many people is this actually going to affect?
So there's hundreds across Tasmania, Tara, across all 3 regions of the state, and it also impacts around about 850 registered racing greyhounds. So it's significant, and there will be an impact to the Tasmanian economy. There will be an impact to local communities, but we now find ourselves in a position where we just need to manage that and deal with that in the best way that we can. I've attended all 3 greyhound racing meetings, just making sure that we've got a presence and we're there for our participants. It would be fair to say, I won't pass on the comments that have been made to me by industry participants, but look, many of them, Tara, they're just absolutely gutted for so many of these people. It's been their livelihood, it's their life. And for those that are of a more mature vintage, a lot of them might have, 2 or 3 dogs and they do it as a hobby, but that's what keeps them going. So there's been so much emotion. It's been so difficult to hear the stories and hear the feeling of loss from people that have invested so much of their life in greyhound racing.
What are the next steps then for TasRacing's involvement in this? My
team and I are working through options and scenarios in relation to what greyhound racing is likely to look like over the ensuing likely wind down and phase out period. What does that mean in terms of the volume of racing? What does that mean for the welfare of greyhounds? What does it mean for breeding, retirement and rehoming? All of our focus is on the welfare of our participants and the safety and welfare of our beautiful racing animals, the greys themselves. They're just such awesome dogs, and look, it looks like it's going to be a case of it is what it is, and as I say, we'll just do what we need to do to look after everybody who's impacted and involved, and that of course includes our greyhounds.
Now, while many across the greyhound racing sector have shared their anger over the ban, there's also many others that are celebrating it. The decision by the Tasmanian government has had strong support from portions of the Australian public, particularly among animal welfare advocates who've long been calling for the sport to be phased out. Among them is Amy MacMahon, President of the Coalition for the Protection of Greyhounds. Amy, thanks for your time today. Why has the Coalition been pushing for the end of greyhound racing?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to mention is that we know the majority of people don't support greyhound racing. People can see that greyhound racing is inherently violent, it's inherently animal abusive, it's inherently wasteful. And Tasmania has recognised this and is taking the step to phase out greyhound racing following the ACT. And what we're really hoping is that this sends a really clear message to every other state and territory to say greyhound racing has lost its social licence. People are appalled to know how many greyhounds are dying on tracks each year. People are appalled by the literally millions of dollars that state governments are giving greyhound racing every year, and people would be happy to see this phased out. So we're hoping that the Tasmanian ban will send a message to the rest of the country. It's time to phase out greyhound racing.
And when you say that you know that the majority of people feel this way, what's that based on?
The Coalition had some polling done a few years ago. So we've got data to show that, the majority of Australians don't support greyhound racing, and even more don't support the amount of public money that's going to greyhound racing.
And you mentioned some of the things there, but what is it that goes on in the industry that are your main concerns and why you feel this is warranted?
This year alone, we've had 81 deaths on tracks around the country. Many more greyhounds who were injured on track and then euthanased at a vet or off track somewhere else. Many dogs are getting injured and lots of issues around animal abuse to do with doping and mistreatment of greyhounds. A few months ago, there was a group of greyhounds, I think it was about 7 greyhounds, who got to a track to race, and then it was decided that they couldn't race because they were all dehydrated. So this gives you a little bit of insight into how greyhounds are being treated behind the scenes, not just the horrific injuries that they get on track, but the treatment that they're getting off track as well is pretty shocking. And the industry knows that this is a problem, and that's why most states will censor the race footage. If there is a race where a greyhound has fallen or has gotten injured, or you can see it limping over the line, most states will censor that footage so that people won't ever see it. And I think they know that if more people could see this footage, there would be more of an outcry and a pushback against greyhound racing.
Those in the sector, many of them would argue that these incidents aren't a reflection of the entire industry. Do you think that there's a way to protect greyhounds without phasing out racing entirely? Like, could we not just call for stricter care and safety measures?
I don't think that there is any way to reform greyhound racing. There is actually no way to make a greyhound racing track safe. I'll give the example of the Kew track in Queensland. The Queensland government spent at least $44 million building what they've claimed is a state-of-the-art track with highest levels of animal safety standards. That track started racing in March, and there's already been, I think, 12 greyhounds who have died after racing at the Kew. And one of the tracks was deemed too unsafe for any racing and was closed down for, I think, a fortnight. And noting also that many states have had, over the last decades, investigations and reviews into greyhound racing that have found a whole range of issues and recommendations that have been put to governments, and really the industry hasn't been able to clean up its act so much. If you look at in South Australia, I think in 2023 they did a big review into greyhound racing. The industry was then given 2 years to clean up its act. We're still within that period. And really not much has happened in terms of improving animal welfare for greyhounds in South Australia. In New South Wales, there is the Drake inquiry. The report has just been given to the racing minister a couple of weeks ago. They're keeping it a secret. So this gives you some indication that there are probably some shocking findings in that report. The best thing we can do is phase it out, give all those dogs loving homes, make sure there's support in place for workers to transition into new productive careers, turn those tracks into things like community sports facilities, and put all that public money that's going into greyhound racing into things that people actually need: housing, healthcare, education.
And you mentioned before, we know it is banned in the ACT. Tassie's going to be next. It once was very briefly in New South Wales, but that was overturned. Where do the other states sit in regard to greyhound racing, and do you expect that they're going to follow suit, or is this a long way away in other areas?
Look, I really hope the Tasmanian example does send a bit of a shockwave to other states. But I think one important thing to note is that all of this is happening because of the huge power and wealth of the gambling companies, the gambling industry, who in every state give big money to the major political parties, and they're able to get favourable conditions, including the continuation of greyhound racing. We see thousands of dollars going to the major parties in each state, also to federal parties as well. And so part of the challenge that we're facing is pushing back against the racing industry, but also pushing back against the immense wealth and power of the gambling industry and these big gambling companies, Sportsbet, Tabcorp, Entain, the kind of ironically named Responsible Wagering Australia, which is the peak body for gambling, who put a lot of money into political parties to see a continuation of racing and a continuation of greyhound racing. That is part of the challenge that we're pushing back against. So I hope that some of these reviews get us a little bit closer, but really none of these reviews will be able to tell us anything other than what we already know. We know that off the back of this, there are lots of people who are reaching out to their own state governments to say it's time to follow Tasmania's example. New Zealand has recently announced a ban as well. I think Wales and Scotland are close behind. Australia is actually one of a very small number of countries that still allow greyhound racing. So we're hoping that off the back of that, it means that other state and territories are going to start to follow suit.
Amy, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining me on the briefing.
Thanks for having me.
That was Amy MacMahon, President of the Coalition for the Protection of Greyhounds, speaking with me there. And that's it for our two-part deep dive into the Australian greyhound racing industry. If you found this ep interesting, don't forget to leave us a comment or a review, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.